This episode of the Danger Close podcast is brought to you by Cry Havoc, from New York Times #1 bestselling author Jack Carr. Cry Havoc, a Tom Rees thriller. Order now.
300 Spartans and their allies held off the invaders for 7 days until their weapons smashed and broken from the slaughter. They fought with bare hands and teeth before being at last overwhelmed. The Spartans and their Thespian allies died to the last man, but the standard of valor they set by their sacrifice inspired the Greeks to rally and in that fall and spring defeat the Persians and preserve the beginnings of Western democracy and freedom from perishing in the cradle. 2 memorials remain today at Thermopylae. Upon the modern one, called the Leonidas Monument, in honor of the Spartan king who fell there, is engraved his response to Xerxes' demand that the Spartans lay down their arms. Leonidas' reply was 2 words, Molin Labe, come and get them. The second monument, the ancient one, is an unadorned stone engraved with the words of the poet Simonides. Its verses comprise perhaps the most famous of all warrior epitaphs. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie.
Let's just kick it off.
Okay.
First, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be here, and especially with everything that you've dealt with recently with the fires, which I want to get into as well, and coming on to talk about your second book, which is Gates of Fire, of course, and we will get to that. But the whole point of the book club is to encourage people to build their libraries, to read, and at the same time to support independent bookstores. Each month I partner with a different bookstore so people can go to that bookstore, and I don't get anything out of it. Let's go to that bookstore to help support them at the bookstore library, read, and then join us to get a little behind the scenes, behind the book, based on what they just read. So that's the kind of the
Let me say to you, Jack, thank you so much for having me on, and for, it's great. People may not know that we're friends, and it's great to see you. I haven't seen you since probably, I don't know, not that long ago, but, if we see each other once a year, that's a lot. And so it's great to be hanging out with you for however long we can hang out together.
And it's my favorite thing apart about doing the book club is getting to do that. And last time I saw you, it was one of the last days of September, or maybe it was even early October. I think it was October 1st, 2nd, 3rd, maybe somewhere in there at your beautiful home, overlooking the Pacific on Malibu. It was so incredible to spend time with you there and see where you write, and it's such a beautiful place. And then just a couple months later, we have the fires. And of course, I'm thinking about you the whole time and texting, and we have a few friends in LA that were evacuated, some who lost homes, as did you. What was that day like for you when you started hearing about the fires? Did you smell them first? Were they that close, or did someone call, or what was that day like for you? I forget if you were there or if you were coming back to it or not. Can you take me through that day really quick?
It was, it was, the topography of the land is just kind of a series of ridges. And, one might be a mile away, the next one might be 2 miles away, so on and so forth. And we saw smoke right away from the Palisades fire early, like 3 hours before the fire came to us. And of course, all of our neighbors were out, looking at it too. And we all, you judged the wind. And it seemed to be, like the smoke is blowing away from us, because that was the way Santa Ana winds always blow. So we thought, we're pretty good. Everything's, Palisades is in trouble, but we're okay. And then the wind changed, and the wind got pretty strong. And pretty soon we started getting warning messages coming in. The cell phone was beeping, be alert, be ready to go. And we're talking to our neighbors, are you staying, or are we, and pretty soon everybody said, I'm getting out of here, And we did leave. I don't know if you saw, Jack, that famous video of cars jamming up at the bottom of Pacific Palisades, where they had to get a bulldozer in to jam the cars out of the way because the fire trucks couldn't go. if we had turned left at the bottom of the hill, we would have been in that. But we turned right and we got out of it. And there had been another fire like 3 weeks earlier where we had evacuated and then we were okay. And we sort of thought, oh, we're going to be okay this time too. And then the next day, a neighbor went up there, somehow got in and sent us a video, showed us our house gone. And that was when we knew,
It's such a beautiful place. And so when you went down to the bottom of the hill, I know exactly where you're talking because I've driven up there. And you went right. So did you get out by going by Pepperdine that way, or did you keep?
Exactly, over Malibu Canyon Road. And in fact, we went right back to the same hotel that we had evacuated to 3 weeks earlier.
Oh my gosh.
So, yeah, that was, yeah. Anyway, that's how it happened.
Did you grab anything, or did you leave with that mindset of we're going to be coming back just like we did a couple of weeks earlier? Or did you grab a few things this time?
We did grab a few things. The main thing I grabbed was my tax information, so I could pay my taxes, and a couple of checkbooks. But otherwise, we didn't get anything. We didn't get any books. We had a bunch of, inventory of books in the garage.
I saw them.
So we lost, pretty much everything, including my car. I had an electric car, as you know, and I thought, I'm not going to be able to recharge this if we're out in the street. So I thought, let's just leave it. It'll be okay. When we came back, it was, totally melted. And, so we lost that too.
And to include, I'm guessing, the Japanese poster of Above the Law with Steven Seagal.
We lost that too, yeah. And my typewriter. I have my souvenir typewriter, kind of like yours. And we found it in the wreckage. It was like melted into a thing about that big, which we're going to keep as a kind of a memento of the thing. But yeah, that got wiped out too.
Oh, it's just so heartbreaking. But you did find this.
We did find that, the Spartan Kothon.
That's right, that I got along with this, which is, I love the Man-at-Arms cover. That cover is that one just still blows me away. I think this cover is one of the best. It's so great. But this was in conjunction with the launch.
Thanks for hanging on to that, Jack.
That's great. Gosh. Of course. I mean, I feel like I should send this to you now, but yours is in remarkably good condition behind you.
In fact, let me talk about that for a second for our listeners. This Kothon, there is a quote from Plutarch back, 100 BC about how the Spartans, the real Spartans, when they went on campaign, they had a special type of mug because they knew they were going to have to drink out of streams or rivers or whatever. And it was designed so that if there was any silt or grit in the water, that it would sink to the bottom, and it had a dark interior so that it didn't look like you were drinking mud. But nobody knows what this thing looked like. So my friend Joel, who is like a great pottery guy, he made this up. And we used it as a kind of a promotion. It's a mug that we have no idea if that's what the real one looked like, but this is the modern version of what that is, of a kothon, Kothon. That's the Greek word for it.
And it's it's remarkably intact. The one you pulled from the ashes of your home. It's
anything that was kiln fired survived the fire.
Oh, that's
pottery, stuff like that. Yeah.
Oh wow, gosh. And what is your plan to rebuild in the same?
Yeah, we're planning on rebuilding. It's going to be a close call because we're underinsured, and it's going to be a matter of can we find the money somewhere to make up what we need to make up.
Oh my gosh, and the books that you had in. Sorry, I have a bunch of books here that I want to talk about.
This is great, Jack.
But are these the ones that burned?
Yeah. Yeah, they burned, yeah.
So this is the Daily Pressfield for those that are just listening, not watching. Illustrations, this limited edition box right here. Actually, we should save this till the end. I want to talk to you about the Daily Pressfield. But I saw all these boxes in the garage when I was there, just 2 months before the fire. So, jeez.
Introducing the BCM Stock Mod 3 and Marksman Risers. Built from years of real-world experience, the BCM Mod 3 stock is the next evolution in M4 accessories. Minimalist, snag-free, and just 6.4 ounces with double-walled H-beam construction for unmatched durability. Paired with the Mark III marksman risers in 0.5 and 0.8 inches. The Mod 3 offers total customization with 6 mounting positions and forward or reverse orientation. It delivers a consistent cheek weld for passive night vision or CQB. For high-ready weapons manipulation, it features a removable diamond textured butt pad, non-slip grip panels, and a quick adjust design with integrated sling attachment points. Plus, its patented internal latch system and ergonomic lever ensure rugged performance with tool-free installation. Proudly made in the USA, the BCM Mod 3 stock, built to outlast and outperform. Get yours now at BravoCompanyUSA.com.
All right, well, let's jump in to, now we've got the update. Let's, before we jump into the book though, we'll get in there. A memory of Paris Island. Do you have a memory of Paris Island, that one that stands out to you?
There's so many. God, I don't know.
And what year was that again? What year was
In any sort of context, Jack?
No, just one when you think back to Paris.
Out of me or something like that.
No, just like, is it day one? Is it standing in some sort of formation, getting yelled at? Is it a wake-up call?
Here's what comes to mind, for whatever this is worth.
Yeah.
At the very end of boot camp at Paris Island, they do this thing, at least in the old days, where it was like a 2-day out in the woods type of thing. And the first time you ever really were in shelter halves and that sort of stuff. And it also involved a really long run, with your rifle at port arms, that kind of thing. And I was a squad leader. And I remember thinking, man, am I going to be able to make this run? This is going to be really a tough one. And the drill instructor said to us squad leader, he says, you guys, I don't want you up front. I want you behind. And so you're going to be responsible for everybody. If anybody starts to drop out, you encourage them, stick with them, make sure. And by telling us that, like, all fear went away, or all doubt went away, because I felt like, now I'm responsible for other people. It's not just me that I'm having to, I don't know why that comes to mind, Jack, but so the run was a piece of cake, just because I was more worried, I'm sure you know, as an officer, about my men, quote unquote, than I was about myself. So I don't know why that comes to mind, but that's the one.
I think I know why it comes to mind, and we'll get to it in Gates of Fire. I think there's a correlation between memory and Gates of Fire. But before we get to that, you wrote for 17 years before you earned your first penny you've written from writing. And that was $3,500 for an option on a screenplay that was never produced.
Correct.
17 years. What was that screenplay, and do you still have it?
I don't have it, but it was, oddly enough, it got burned up. I might have it actually in my storage locker. But it was actually a military screenplay. It was called Sergeant's Sweetheart. And a director named Joe Rubin, who did a movie called Dreamscape and a couple of others. He optioned it for $3,500. It never got made, but that was the first penny I ever made.
After 17 years?
Ever 17 years. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so you do, how many years were you writing before, let's say, Above the Law, before 1988 timeframe?
That was probably like 25 years, something like that. Yeah.
Amazing. So between 1988 and Legend of Bagger Vance, which comes out in 1995, what are you doing in that close to 10-year period, and how long were you working on Legend of Bagger Vance in that period?
Let me ask you a question, Jack. I wonder, why are you hitting this thing? Or is it for writers that might be listening in to encourage them? Is that what you're thinking about?
Exactly. For people that just see Legend of Bagger Vance and then see all the stars that were in that film and the director and the person who adapted the screenplay, that was a big deal. And that just see Gates of Fire being on every military reading list out there. But for those that are trying to write or thinking about it and think about these things as overnight successes, that you just wrote a book and all of a sudden we're a famous established author that could pick your projects, it's leading into why you picked Gates of Fire, really.
Okay.
So what were you doing in that time frame between the screenwriting, figuring that side out, and then writing this novel?
It's a great question. I mean, I had like about a 10-year period as a kind of a B or C level screenwriter. And for the first half of it, I was, my agent teamed me up with an older established writer named Ron Shusett, who did the first Alien. He was the guy, you know, the scene with the chest burster and the thing over the face. He came up with those things. So, and then I had like another 4 years on my own as a screenwriter. And, then one day, this idea for the idea for the Legend of Bagger Vance came to me as a book, not as a movie. And my agent basically fired me. And but I was seized by this. I wrote it and it came out like in 4 months.
Wow.
Like one of your books, Jack, you know, it just started and it came, you know. And to my amazement, I thought it was like one of the dumbest ideas anybody had ever come up with, you know. A golf novel based on the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Mm-hmm. But it sold right away, and Robert Redford came on right away, and, you know, who knows, you know, the stars lined up for once. And ever since then, I have only written books. That was the end of my screenwriting career.
Okay. And that book comes out in 1995. So 5 years later, you have, directed by Robert Redford, starring Will Smith, Matt Damon, Charlize Theron, screenplay by Jeremy Levin, and the final film starring Jack Lemmon and Lane Smith. I mean, that's a big deal. And only 5 years for those listening. That's a good time frame from a book coming out to being made. That's not bad.
No.
And so you have this, people see it as a success. Some people might see it overnight success, but they see a book and a film with all these big stars. So that immediately makes them jump to, okay, success, this person can choose his next project, essentially. Did you feel that way? Did you have anyone, an agent, publisher, wondering what the next golf book was going to be, or what the next quasi-religious, philosophical, sports type of a book was going to be that they could turn into a movie? But what was that time period like for you, and when did you decide on Gates of Fire?
These are great questions, Jack, and you understand exactly how the business works, right? So, yeah, I think anytime you have any kind of a hit, they want you to do it again, right? Giving the exact same thing sideways, you know? But I knew there was well, let me get a little deeper than this. As you know, I'm a big believer in the muse. I believe that we're inspired by another level of reality, and that we sort of get an assignment in the form of we're just seized by an idea. And so I had no idea to follow a golf book. But what could I possibly do? And then I could tell this long of a story, but somehow I was seized by the idea of doing a book about Thermopylae, about the 300 Spartans. And again, I sort of thought, this is a completely uncommercial idea. It's about a place that nobody could spell, nobody can pronounce, that happened 2,500 years ago, that doesn't involve Americans. And we know Americans, the only thing they care about is other Americans. So, but again, I was just seized with that I just had to do it. And again, as you know, Jack, novels, fiction, you have to write the whole book. You can't do a proposal. You can't get a deal. You have to write it on spec. So you're looking at 2 to 3 years with no income on the come, totally. But I was just seized with this idea. Just had to do it. And not would it worked out.
And on your website, you talk about, so you were, as a lot of people probably do in their free time, you're reading the histories by Herodotus. And I think you're reading it's multiple times now that you've read this book. But this time, for whatever reason, there's a passage that stands out to you. And I'm going to read it and butcher everyone's name in it, because when you read a book, and even when I write, I don't know if it's this way for you, when I write, especially in the genre that I write in, when I'm writing a Russian name or a Iranian name or something like that, I don't have to say it. That's Ray Porter. That's my narrator. He has to say it. I just have to spell it correctly every time, and have it not sound like the other Russian names or the other Iranian names in the story, however that works out. Can't rhyme, not the same first letter, last letter, which is a lot more difficult than people would think.
Exactly.
But when you were writing these, did you pronounce the names? Do you know how to say all of these different names?
No, I have no clue. I'm with you. It's just written on the page.
It's just written. Perfect. Yeah, that's.
But I will say, just like you, when I was making up names, not this, the character you're about to read was a real historical character, but I would try to make them as American or easy to sound as possible. Like Alexandros was one character. Then I would give him sort of actual English names, nicknames like Rooster, because people say, oh, I couldn't understand the names. It really bothered, that kind of thing.
Right, exactly. Arte, I think, is in here. So you have some that are easier than others. But this is the one when I first picked this up, and I don't know if I've ever told you this, where I was when I read this book. So it comes out in 1998. Is that right?
Yeah.
1998. I read it in 2001, and I read it after September 11th, and this is my copy that I read after September 11th. When we're already in the Middle East, we went to Kuwait and then the shipboardings from there. But that's where I read this, in this barracks. It wasn't even a barracks; it was more of a hangar where they just put a bunch of cots, and then we lived in there. But that's where I read that, and I read this passage, and just like it stood out to you, it certainly stood out to me the first time that I read this, and you essentially start the book with it to set the tone. And here it is. Although extraordinary valor was displayed by the entire corps of Spartans and Thespians, yet bravest of all was declared the Spartan Denekis. It is said that on the eve of battle, he was told by a native of Tracheus that the Persian archers were so numerous that they fired their volleys, the mass of arrows blocked out the sun. Denekis, however, quite undaunted by this prospect, remarked with a laugh, "Good, then we'll have our battle in the shade." I mean,
it's a great one. I'm getting chills just when you read it then. Yeah.
I got chills reading that, and I do every time that I think of this or reread it. Because that attitude, especially reading this right after September 11th, when you think you're going into this fight, and it took a little while to get there. I ended up, anyway, we did the shipboardings and then got to Afghanistan about a year later. But we think, when I'm reading this, that we're going right in. We don't know yet that we're going to do shipboardings first and then come back and go to Afghanistan a year later. But we also think that this thing in Afghanistan is going to be about 6 months, maybe a year. And if you're not here right now, you're probably going to miss it, because we're looking back on Desert One, on Grenada, on Panama, on Mogadishu, these things that are flashpoints and not sustained combat operations like Vietnam. And so we think we're going in, and I'm reading this, and it just spoke to me, obviously. You can tell by the way I'm talking about it. So you read that, and you say, this is my next book. And people can't pronounce it, they've never heard of it, but I'm going to dedicate however long you think it's going to take at the outset when you decide this, 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever it might be, that this is the next project. And so you devote yourself to this. And how did you start that research? And I'm asking for a couple different reasons. One of them being, the book that I'm working on right now is 1968. That's not that long ago. You jump back a little farther than that in Gates of Fire. I'm just going back to 1968, and the book took me so much longer than I thought at the outset, because I wanted to put every single sentence through the lens of 1968. I want to write it through the lens of 1968 without the benefit of all these years, 50 plus years of hindsight. I don't want someone to say, oh, he just picked up these characters, dropped them in the jungle, wrote 1968 in there, and then it's just a normal book. I wanted each character to portray a different perspective on the Vietnam War, but through the lens of 1968. And that means that every sentence, I have to think, someone's making a phone call. Is it a rotary dial? You put in a quarter? Wait a sec, not a quarter. Would it have been a dime, a nickel? All of those. And then when you go to, let's say, Moscow, how are they doing things there? If someone goes to a restaurant in Moscow in 1968, what were the restaurants? How many were there? Were there choices? Was all of these things that now have to be, you have to go back to figure that out. That took a lot of time. So I can only imagine how the research was for Gates of Fire when you're jumping back to Thermopylae. What was that research like for you?
It's a great question, Jack. It actually was a lot simpler than it sounds because there's so little information about that era. I could read Herodotus, I could read Thucydides, I could read a few others from that time. But, we don't have, I know you know this, I think we have like 47 words that were actually written by a Spartan. Nothing else that was written because they were so secretive. They never wanted to give away any of their stuff. So I had to kind of really read between the lines for so many things like that, of the reality of it. So that a lot of what I was doing was fictionalizing. And I know people have sometimes, I don't know if I call it knocking Gates of Fire, but they've said, oh, it's too much like contemporary Marines. But, I figured it's got to be something like that. I mean, how do you train? It's the same way. Human beings are the same way. But
That's interesting. So I should have gone back further, because now, like, you can check me if you read Cry Havoc, you can read that and say, oh, you know what, I was around then, and that is certainly not the kind of, that car wasn't automatic. It only came in it was only manual. Like those types of things. Like I have to have somebody, they have to shift gears if they're getting onto a thing. It's not just they can't just drive onto the freeway. I have to have them shifting gears. And was it an 8-track? Were those in there? Or what were they listening to in the radio? Was it just a radio? Like I have to think through all those things. I should have gone back further and written a book further and just made it all up, apparently.
yeah, in fact, that was one of the things that helped me was nobody really knows what hoplite warfare was like. There are only scattered descriptions here and there. One thing I did do is I had a friend named Chip Armstrong who was a hoplologist, meaning like an edged weapons specialist. And I visited him in Sedona for like 3 days. He was kind enough to work with me. And we just sort of got out into the dirt and said, what would it be like? We knew they were shields. We knew they were 8-foot spears that they thrust with overhand. And so we just sort of gamed it out. But a lot of it is you really just had to use your imagination. Like, for instance, one aspect was a heavily armored infantryman, like the Spartans were, with a breastplate, a helmet, greaves, a spear, a heavy, heavy shield that you had to be, like a Superman to hang on to the shield for 2 hours or something like that. There was no way that these guys carried their own armor into battle. So they had to have, armor bearers, and that became my narrator was, Dionyscus is the character that you read his thing, and he had to have, actually in the real world, when a single Spartan hoplite warrior went to battle accompanied by 7 helots. But I thought, I can't do that. That's too many. But I certainly, thought, well, okay, now what's the relationship going to be like? It's got to be that these guys who are fighting are going to be wounded. They're going to drop out of fights at certain points. So whoever their armor bearer, their battle squire is, just like a medieval squire's knight, they've got to be somewhat of a medic. They're probably also going to have to fight one way or another. And they're not going to be in armor. So they're going to have to use something like my character was an archer and would, support the guy. So in other words, a lot of it was just kind of imagining what it would be like and then delivering that information with enough authority that the reader goes, okay, I buy it. This must be what it was like.
Wow. Well, you certainly buy it reading the book. And it's interesting because, no one can really say, hey, I was there, this isn't right. Whereas with 1968, there's plenty of people who can say you didn't get this right. And especially on this one, I really want to honor those guys. It's about Mac Sog going into Laos, Cambodia, North Vietnam. And I want to honor those guys and everyone who went over and served over there. So I really, it's personal, because now I know a lot of those guys.
Yeah.
I've had them on the podcast. I knew a lot of them beforehand.
It's a big responsibility, isn't it? Yeah.
It's weighing heavily, which is why I'm trying to get every single. I know I'll mess up something, but it won't be for a lack of trying. It won't be for lack of effort.
By the way, Jack, if you need to check with me, because I was alive in 1968, I can tell you what it was, a dime or a nickel.
I might take you up on some of those as I go through and finish up edits. But did you also feel pressure with Gates of Fire, or did you have more of an evolved view of your second book, a sophomore effort, they like to call it? Did that take up any bandwidth as you were writing Gates of Fire, the pressure to have it be as successful as The Legend of Bagger Vance?
Another great question, and the answer is no, because it's sort of the amount of the money that I made from Bagger Vance, I spent in about 2 weeks. So I had no money except, whatever I had saved. And I was just so into the project itself. Like I said, I didn't think it would sell. I just was trying to do the best job. I was just completely consumed by it. I wasn't worried about, sophomore or anything like that. Yeah. No.
And for those listening, you write on your website that no one was as surprised as you were when it sold 1 million copies out of the gate. So for those listening, yes, it was I guess you could say an objectively successful endeavor based on those.
In fact, let me interrupt you for a second, Jack. It wasn't until because it didn't sell out of the gate. It did pretty good. And then it wasn't until 3 or 4 years later that a guy that has now become a friend named Dave Danello, was a Marine captain, called me up and he said, "Did you know that Gates of Fire is really big in the Marine Corps?" And I said, "No, I had no idea." Because nobody necessarily writes you about that. So it was only then that I realized, this has really found an audience in the military community. And I didn't know.
Well, eventually it sells 1 million copies, which is still pretty dang good.
But it took a while.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right, hopping on to do a quick little video on my EDC. This is just going to be really about the pistol, which for a while now has just been this 365. And I absolutely love this pistol for quite a few reasons. One, it feels good in the hand, and that mag capacity, of course. So right here, this is the P365 by SIG, and I used to carry the Glock 43 before this, but then when this came out, I incorporated it into the pages of True Believer right here, and also started carrying this. So that mag capacity is really what did it for me. I still run the iron sights just because I have so much time running those, not as much time running a red dot. So until I put more time on the range on the red dot, there it is, the irons. So that is that. I don't always carry an extra mag. If I do, I don't have anything else in this pocket except that mag. So that's that. If I have the extra mag, it's in there with nothing else in that pocket. Also, if I'm leaving the house or even around the house, I always have this on me, Snake Staff Systems tourniquet. So that is that. And then the holster for this, also been using this for quite some time, and this is the Black Point Tactical Mini Wing right there. Has the leather on the sides, and what I love about Black Point Tactical is that it says what it's for. So if you have more than one pistol, right here, this says that it's for the 6-hour P365 right there. So ammo. Right here, I've been running the 365 V-Crown here from SIG as well. So just as important as what you carry, of course, is getting that training. A lot of places you can go out there to get training these days. Of course, SIG Academy, there's Thunder Ranch, there's Gunsight. Mickey Shook at Carry Trainer travels around the country putting on classes and seminars. But get that training and stay safe out there. Did you start with themes? And we've talked about this before, about me misinterpreting something you said on Joe Rogan years ago.
Right, yeah.
And I think it was probably 15 or 16 when you were on that, maybe 17, somewhere in there. But it was when I was writing, I heard it anyway, when I was writing my first novel.
Yeah.
And what I thought you said was that you take a yellow sticky and put it next to your typewriter with a 1-word theme on it. And so I thought, revenge. And so I took the yellow sticky, I write revenge, and I put it right to the left of the mouse pad on the computer. And I stick it right there. I take a little tape and put it on the bottom, the part that's not sticky. So I have revenge. And then I cheated a little bit and I said revenge without constraint. So I had 3 words, but I thought it was supposed to be 1 based on what you said. And then after we got to know each other, you told me that's in fact not what you said. And I went back and listened, and it's you're exactly right. It is not what you said. But I feel like it really helped me the way I, for whatever reason, interpreted it. Probably because I was driving when I was listening to the podcast or whatever else. And by the time I got back to write it down, it had filtered through my brain as a 1-word theme. But if you could tell that story and who you got that from, the real story, the sentence or two, and then did you start with a theme, a couple sentences that guided the writing process for Gates of Fire?
Another great question. This real story comes from Robert McKee, the great storytelling, guru. And he told the story that when he was a young man, he got to interview Paddy Chayefsky, the only screenwriter who has won 3 Oscars for original screenplays. And they were talking about theme. And Paddy Chayefsky said to him, this is back from the days of typewriters, he said, as soon as I know what the theme is to my play, because he was more of a playwright, he says, I type it out in a single sentence and I scotch tape it to the front of my typewriter. And after that, nothing goes onto the page that isn't on theme. So that was what you misinterpreted as 1 word. It actually was a sentence. But then the sidebar to that is and I told you this, Jack, I saw something with Francis Ford Coppola on Instagram where he said, like you, he picks 1 word. So, like for The Godfather, his word was succession. So, which is sort of interesting. But to get to the second half of your question, I didn't actually tape anything to my computer, but in my mind, I thought every character in this story, Gates of Fire, has to represent a different form of heroism, like including and particularly the women. The female characters had to represent a whole different style. And then, so we had one character who was Polynikes, who was just like born like a lion. He just had heroism. And then the central character of Dionysus, who sort of had to construct it with a lot of thought and a lot of effort and so on and so forth. So that was my guiding thing. It's all about the ability to go into the face of death and how you did it. Everyone was coming from a different point of view.
So you didn't have an overall theme. So you didn't think about fate and honor specifically, although it seems like those are themes that naturally occur in a story.
Yeah, they arose naturally, yeah. And I also wanted the bad guys to have that same thing. The Persian characters, I wanted them to have their own version of what courage was.
That's interesting. That takes, well, I'm going to wait. I have a question specifically about that, but I'm going to hold off on it. Did you travel over there to get a feel for the land, or?
I did, but I traveled there after the book was written. And mainly just like you do too, Jack, like I wanted to know, I have a mountain here. Is there really, in the book, is there really a mountain there? And that was what I was looking for, that kind of thing.
If you were to confirm some of the things that you wrote about in the book.
Yeah. And if you actually go to Sparta, there is a mountain there, and there is a river there, and you can tell that really shaped the Spartan character.
And you touched on this a little bit earlier, but how long did it take you, or how did you come to the idea that you wanted to tell this through the POV, through the point of view that you used, instead of going, hey, just with these characters that maybe people may have heard of, maybe, or at least they're like a king and a warrior, and instead you choose this other direction. What was, and it's obviously conscious, but was that from the get-go, or what made you make that decision?
Another great question, Jack. It was from the get-go. Like the story is told in the first person by the battle squire, who's actually a young boy, maybe 16 years old, for Dionysus, for the central character. And the reason I wanted to do that was I felt the Spartan culture is so different from ours that it really needs an intermediate character to kind of explain it. Mm-hmm. So this particular boy was not a native Spartan. He came from another city, so that it was all new to him, this crazy culture that they had. And so he could be an intermediate character to sort of explain it to the reader, so it wasn't so alien And I think it worked.
Oh, it certainly works. And I want to read a sentence here. And this is probably going to be the toughest one to recall, as we talked about earlier. Sometimes people ask me about my early books when I'm right now in 1968, and someone will ask me a question about Terminalist or True Believer, and it's obscure. And maybe this is like that, maybe it's not. But it's such a beautiful sentence is why I want to read it. And it's chapter 5 right here. They say that ghosts, sometimes those that cannot let go their bond to the living, linger and haunt the scenes of their days under the sun, hovering like substantial birds of carrion, refusing Hades' command to retire beneath the earth. That's a beautiful sentence, and I know I messed up the name of the birds, but that's a beautifully written sentence. Do you remember writing that sentence?
No.
When you write, I figured you would say that. It's been a moon or two, but do you ever write a sentence and you say, "Gosh, that's good"?
I do. And, I was just thinking, I saw an interview with Bob Dylan
Yeah.
where he said that he doesn't remember writing any of the songs.
Jeez.
I don't know if that's him being kind of self-mythologizing or whatever, but I do think when you write a great sentence, it comes from somewhere else, and you look back at it and you go, wow, did I actually write that sentence, But again, also, finding the voice for Gates of Fire or for any other book is I wanted it to sound like it was an authentic document written at that time. So I based it kind of on the translations of Thucydides or Herodotus or Xenophon, usually written by Oxford or Cambridge dons in the 1890s, in a kind of archaic, very formal, and so that voice, once you surrender to that voice, sometimes sentences like that come out, because that's the way a translation of Plato would have come out, something like that. So in other words, I feel like it wasn't me, it was coming from somewhere else.
Wow, I love it. I love it. And you capture, let's say, the brutality of war, along with not the beauty of self-sacrifice, but the honor of self-sacrifice, maybe is a better way to put it. Did that come about naturally, or did you consciously think of those things as you wrote?
I think it came about naturally. Once the thing started flowing, it kind of came about. I mean, again, it's the imagination, right? I'm trying to imagine myself back there and what that was like. Another thing, Jack, that I wanted to say was honor. And I'd like to hear what you think about this. Honor today is so lacking and been so trampled upon by, so many people acting, in the public eye dishonorably, and that to write about it straight ahead, it's, you can do it, but you're one of the rare people that can. And I think, because of your experience and your power as a writer, but you can write about honor when it's set 2,500 years ago, and the people that are talking are Spartans. And that was sort of a thing, that was a key that allowed me to say things as a writer about honor, about self-sacrifice, that the characters could say them, and you wouldn't laugh at them. You wouldn't scoff at them. You had to say, these guys meant it. These guys lived it. And because it was a true story, and they all really did die, there's no way you, the reader, could mock it or live it down, whatever the word is.
Yeah, it's maybe it's because it's so lacking that people gravitate. They recognize it when they see it, when it's written honestly, and they gravitate to it because they know that they can sense it. The readers, you can't fool readers. It's kind of like trying to fool I don't know, E3, E4, E5 in the military. If you're an officer or you're a senior enlisted guy and you come down and they know you're not gonna fool those guys. That's why you have to be honest with them, and that they'll respect that. That's the most important part, I think, of leadership is that honesty up and down the chain of command, so that they know they can trust you. It's honesty because that equates to trust, and so maybe that's why. Maybe that's because people can sense it, and sense that it's real. It comes from a real place. I wouldn't. Yeah, I think that's probably it. So going back to how do you say, I'm going to pronounce it. I always say Denikis because that's how I just said it the first time.
I say Dionysius. I have no idea what a real Greek would say.
He has some of the book's most profound reflections, I think, are the ones that resonate a lot with me anyway. And I'm going to read this passage right here and get your thoughts on it. This I realize now, watching Dionysius rally and tend to his men, was the role of the officer, to prevent those under his command at all stages of battle, before, during, and after, from becoming possessed, to fire their valor when it flagged, and rein in their fury when it threatened to take them out of hand. This was his job. That was why he wore the transverse crested helmet of an officer. His was not, I could see now, the heroism of an Achilles. He was not a Superman who waded into the slaughter, single-handedly slaying the foe by myriads. He was just a man doing a job whose primary attribute was self-restraint and self-composure, not for his own sake, but for those whom he led by his example. A job whose objective could be boiled down to a single understatement, as he did at the Hot Gates on the morning he died, of performing the commonplace under uncommonplace conditions. That's a profound 2 paragraphs right there. Do you remember what inspired that?
I remember that passage very vividly. I'm not sure. I was just trying to articulate what seemed to me the officer's true calling. Performing the commonplace, keeping his men from getting out of hand, and being an example to them. But also, like I said before, I wanted each character to represent a type of courage. And Dionysius' story, I'll go a little longer maybe than you want here, was that he had an older brother who was killed in battle, and who he worshipped as a great commander and a great leader. But he felt that he himself was just an average guy. But and in fact, he wound up marrying the woman of his brother. So he felt somehow he had to elevate himself to that level. And in order to do that, he had to think very, very deeply and build himself to do that. So that was why I admired him as a character more than anybody else. So you may be getting to this too. Like the theme of the book, Jack, is the question Dionysius keeps asking through the whole book is, what is the opposite of fear? I mean, are you going to talk about that? In which case,
it was my next question.
Okay, I'll let you go ahead.
Well, I mean, right. I mean, I just want to say that last line of that paragraph again. Performing the commonplace under uncommonplace conditions. I think especially for people going into the military or any sort of leadership position, it could be a family, could be yourself even. Those 2 paragraphs right there really resonate. But as you said with this character, and I knew you would remember this line, which is why I was going to it next. I wasn't sure if you'd remember writing that, but I knew you'd remember writing this next one when he says the opposite of fear is love. I want you to tell me a little bit about that.
That's really the theme of the book in a way, right? And one of the reasons this just sort of evolved out of the material. I'm giving this in great depth, Jack. I hope that's okay.
Yes.
If you think about hoplite type of warfare, where you're heavily armored, you're shield to shield with the man next to you, your shield is partly covering him, so that there's a tremendous amount of honor here that you cannot let the man next to you be exposed, right? And you're in a file 8 ranks deep. And behind you might be your uncle, your brother, your father, everybody that you're with, and they know you. And if any action you take is going to be reported back, right? For good or ill. And here you are standing maybe half a mile, maybe 500 yards across from the enemy. And they're also in this same line, and you have to march toward them. Every step you take, coming closer to that moment of, am I going to hold up under this? So that it seemed to me that fear was the huge thing. It was, how do you conquer fear? And fear being the most natural emotion and deepest emotion, self-preservation, right? So that somebody like Dionysius, who's trying to sort of cobble together his own courage, he doesn't have that lion-hearted courage that others do. He thinks about this. What is the opposite? And he thinks, if you're an officer, the fact that you have to lead your men, that can be an antidote to fear, right? But it's, because it'll make you, you've just got to do it, right? But for Dionysius, he said, that's not really the real opposite of fear. That's just a sort of a coping mechanism for Dionysius. Anyway, the bottom line was, after he thought about this, and a couple of events happened in the story, he says, the opposite of fear is love. And in this case, he means the love between the men in the phalanx. And that was, and then there's another character in the story who actually articulates this rather than Dionysius, that the other character says, when I first saw, he came from another country, and he said, when I first saw the way you Greeks fought, I thought it was the craziest fucking thing I'd ever seen, to just march at each other. And then I realized, watching it, that what made it great was the glue that held this phalanx together, and that glue was love, and that was the opposite, the true opposite of fear. So that was how that theme came out.
And interesting what you said at the beginning of that statement goes back to the story from boot camp, from Marine Corps boot camp from Parris Island, about being put in a position to lead your guys. And that gave you that. So there it is. There's the correlation.
Yeah.
There's the correlation right there. And in the years since Gates of Fire was published, has your understanding of courage and fear and love evolved since then? And these.
That's another good question. It has, in one sense. I have this kind of theory that life exists on two levels, at least two levels. The material level is the level we live on now, where we're in a body, we're mortal, we're going to die, so on and so forth. And the predominant emotion, I believe, on that level is fear. That we all live, whether we realize it or not, in fear, when we live in a mortal body that could die, that people we love can die, et cetera, et cetera. But on a higher level, on the level that the gods live on, the predominant emotion is love. And so I think that we as artists are trying to get from that lower level to that higher level in what we work on, And so I do think that when we mortals witness anybody or any group operating by the laws of the higher level, it moves us to tears because we sense that. And the Christ story, that's it in a nutshell. On the cross for everybody else. But the Spartan story is really the same story, but in a group. Because the Spartans knew they were going to their death, and they went to it. And so they were living out of love and by the laws of the higher dimension. I don't know if that makes sense, Jack, but that's kind of my theory about it.
It does, and it leads perfectly into my next question. I'm going to read another passage here, and then get your thoughts on history and heroes. And here you write, over the following decade, more than 60 battles, campaigns, and wars were fought between and among the cities of Greece. At least 40 polios were, including such impenetrably founded citadels as boom, 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 were sacked in whole or in part. Numberless farms were torched, temples burned, warships sunk, men-at-arms slaughtered, wives and daughters carried off into slavery. No Hellen, however, mighty his city, would state with certainty that even one season hence, he would still find himself above the earth, with his head still upon his shoulders, and his wife and children slumbering in safety by his side. The state of affairs was unexceptionable, neither better nor worse than any era in 1,000 years, back to Achilles and Hector, Theseus and Heracles, to the birth of the gods themselves. Business as usual, as the empori, the merchants, say. A history of warfare condensed into, or of this portion of history anyway, condensed into a paragraph. And I want to get your thoughts on that and on heroes. We have Leonidas in this, of course, now because of this book and the film. Of course, people are familiar with Leonidas. Some of his statements. There's memes and posters and tattoos and all sorts of things out there. But I wanted to get your thoughts on heroes, maybe specifically, maybe generally, because you write about heroes here. You write about heroes in other book. We all think about heroes. We all have myths passed down. We understand myths. We understand fairy tales. We understand lessons and parables. We have Lancelot. We have Achilles. You have Galahad and the Grail, who is almost a perfect example, but people don't remember him because he's not humanized as some of these others are, who are not perfect. They have their flaws. And I want to get your thoughts on heroes, on flaws. And you mentioned the Persians earlier, so I'm taking it back to where you mentioned Persians and humanizing them in this book and how that was important to you. Can you have heroes in an unworthy cause? That's a question. And then two, heroes in general. What do you think about heroes throughout time and now in a time when we can go back and pick out only the flaws from people who have been looked at as heroes over time to tear them down for whatever reason? It's a hard time to have been a hero these days because you get picked apart by anyone who has a computer or a phone. So I guess generally your thoughts on heroes, and specifically, can you have heroes in an unworthy cause?
That's a great one. In fact, I'm reading a book now. I'm rereading a book called Lost Victories by, I'm sure you know it, Field Marshal.
Yes, I have it. Yes.
Manstein, who was one of Hitler's great generals. And it's his story of trying to hold off the Russians coming from the east when he knew that the war was lost. And they've just lost battle after battle. And that's why his book was called Lost Victory. So he was certainly a hero in a very bad cause. Mm-hmm. And if you even think about the movie Das Boot, the submarine movie, which is another Nazi, but the guys on that boat were heroes in a limited sense, that we hope they didn't know what was really going on. But it does seem to me that a hero the definition of a hero to me is he's got to be operating out of the laws of the higher dimension, operating out of love. It's like a hero should always be, in my opinion, defending the weak, defending the vulnerable. That's why the Knights of the Round Table, that was their charge, right? Mm-hmm. To defend the weak. And when force is used and you're punching down, that's the opposite of heroism. And in fact, it's craven, terrible stuff. You always have to be punching up and I think one of the reasons the story of the Spartans at Thermopylae is so unforgettable is that they were so outnumbered. It was some absolute lost cause from beginning to end, but it was in a good cause. So I don't know, this is a real tough time for heroes right now. You get a guy like John McCain or something, and he's gone, and not too many people are standing up for him anymore. Yeah,
it's interesting to think about.
I'm not sure that answered your question.
Oh,
Jack,
you mentioned Knights of the Round Table. So you have Sir Lancelot. People kind of remember him maybe from growing up or from a movie or something like that. Flawed. So it seems to me that those heroes that had their flaws throughout history are the ones that still resonate today. Where you have Galahad, who people don't really remember because he was so perfect. So it's interesting to think about as you're creating a protagonist in stories today. So it's something that I think about.
And you can speak to this too, Jack. You almost have to invent a flaw if if there isn't one, leaping out at you. Otherwise, the hero is too perfect, and it's not interesting.
Almost bland in a
Yeah.
sense. So, and I wanted to read something else here because there's another theme in this book as well, a theme of brotherhood that jumps out to me anyway. And you write, "This is my shield. I bear it before me into battle, but it is not mine alone. It protects my brother on my left. It protects my city. I will never let my brother out of its shadow, nor my city out of its shelter. I will die with my shield before me, facing the enemy." Once again, another passage that resonated with me. Certainly at the time I read it right after September 11th, because in the SEAL teams it's a brotherhood. We have this saying, "Long live the brotherhood." So that one jumped out at me. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that passage and brotherhood in the context of the book.
Well, that's, in the Marine Corps, I know you know this, Jack. There's a thing that you have to say, "This is my rifle. There are many others like it, but if this is mine." And, I forgot the exact words of it, but for a rifleman, it's, "I will face the enemy and my rifle will be deadly and I will never let it out of my grip, and I'll die with this in my hands." So I just sort of stole that and reconfigured it for a Spartan thing. But it certainly wouldn't surprise me if we could beam ourselves back that the Spartans did have some kind of a saying like that. And again, like there's a famous passage in Plutarch, I think, that I know where he asks the question, "Why do the Spartans punish with a fine the warrior who loses his helmet or his weapon in combat, but punish with loss of all citizen rights the man who loses his shield?" And the answer is that spear and helmet are for the protection of the individual, but the shield is for protection of the whole line. So again, that's brotherhood, right? And that whole way that the shield protected the man on your right as well as you, that must have been an incredible responsibility. And I'm sure that those boys were inculcated with that from age, 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah, no, certainly. And it's probably another one of the reasons why it's on every military reading list, those themes of brotherhood. But there's also a lot of leadership lessons in here. And I didn't know if that was intentional at the start or not, or it just came through creating these characters who are going to be in leadership positions quite naturally in the story. So I want to ask you about that. But here's a passage on leadership. "To the beat of the Spartans and their allies advanced, 8-footers at the upright, their honed and polished spear points flashing in the sun. Now the foe broke into an all-out charge. Leonidas, displaying neither haste nor urgency, fell into step in his place in the front rank as it advanced to envelop him, with the knights flowing impeccably into position upon his right and left." And that's an interesting passage right there. Leonidas displaying neither haste nor urgency as a leader that stood out to me, but also falling into step in his place in the front rank. So there's a lot of leadership lessons in here. There's that, and I wanted to read this as well before I get your thoughts. This is kind of a long one, but I'm going to read it because it's an important one. All right, here we go. "Leonidas now held up his own bracelet and slid the twin halves together in place. 'Brothers and allies, I salute you. Gather, friends, and hear the words of my heart.' He paused for a moment, sober and solemn. Then, when all stood silent, he spoke. 'When a man seats before his eyes the bronze face of his helmet and steps off from the line of departure, he divides himself, as he divides his ticket, in 2 parts. One part he leaves behind. That part, which takes delight in his children, which lifts his voice in the chorus, which clasps his wife to him in the sweet darkness of their bed. That half of him, the best part, a man sets aside and leaves behind. He banishes from his heart all feelings of tenderness and mercy, all compassion and kindness, all thought or concept of the enemy as a man, a human being like himself. He marches into battle bearing only the second portion of himself, the baser measure, the half which knows slaughter and butchery and turns the blind eye to quarter. He could not fight at all if he did not do this.' The men listened, silent and solemn. Leonidas, at the time, was 55 years old. He had fought in more than 20 battles since he was 20. Wounds as ancient as 30 years stood forth, lurid upon his shoulders and calves, on his neck and across his steel-colored beard. Then this man returns, alive, out of the slaughter. He hears his name called and comes forward to take his ticket. He reclaims that part of himself, which he had earlier set aside. This is a holy moment, a sacramental moment, a moment in which a man feels the gods as close as his own breath. What unknowable mercy has spared us this day? What clemency of the divine has turned the enemy's spear one handbreadth from our throat and driven it fatally into the breast of the beloved comrade at our side? Why are we still here above the earth? We who are no better, no braver, who revered heaven no more than these are our brothers whom the gods have dispatched to hell. When a man joins the two pieces of his ticket and sees them weld in union together, he feels that part of him, the part that knows love and mercy and compassion, come flooding back over him. This is what unstrings his knees. What else can a man feel at that moment than the most grave and profound thanksgiving to the gods who, for reasons unknowable, have spared his life this day? Tomorrow, their whim may alter. Next week, next year. But this day, the sun still shines upon him. He feels its warmth upon his shoulders. He beholds about him the faces of his comrades whom he loves, and he rejoices in their deliverance and his own. That passage right there, I think, is one of the most powerful of the book, especially having gone to Iraq and Afghanistan and knowing people that are dealing with the physical and emotional trauma of the battlefield of those years, of those 20 years that we were involved in global war on terror, for lack of a better term. And I think those passages could really help a lot of people who have a hard time coming back and flipping that switch. I saw it for years and years, people who couldn't leave it behind and who came home and brought all of those things that they had either witnessed or been involved with or questioned downrange, and they brought that home to the family. They couldn't flip that switch and be the other half of the ticket. And I think the way that you write about that here could be so beneficial to people who spend time downrange in Iraq or Afghanistan, or anybody who goes out there that puts on the badge and goes out there as a police officer and then comes home to a family. Did you know, do you remember writing that? And after September 11th, and we all start hearing about things, post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury, and people having a hard time dealing with, like I said, the trauma of the battlefield. Did you think back on that passage? Because it is so powerful.
I do remember that. And first, I got to thank you, Jack, for reading the book so closely and for pulling the passages that you have pulled, because they're really, they hit certain points. I just will say that passage was true to a real thing. What the Spartans did, it was sort of like a version of dog tags. Before they would go into battle, they would take a twig and break it in half. And one half they would leave behind, and the other half they would keep on their person. And the reason for that was the bodies became sometimes so maimed that they could not be identified afterwards. And so they could only be identified like a dog tag by the twig that they would, connect to the other one. And the reason they used twigs was because they were so of no value at all, so that nobody was going to steal them or anything like that they would have it. So I remember thinking about what did that mean? What would that be like for these guys? And somebody like Leonidas, who obviously would think really deeply, he's the king, right? That he would really see much more in that simple dog tag thing than anybody else would. So, but I never had really connected it to PTSD. I was just thinking of it totally, or, coming back from Iraq or Afghan. I just thought of it purely in terms of that kind of warfare, that hoplite warfare that the Spartans fought. But that was a real thing, the twigs. And there was a name for it, but I gave it the name ticket because I thought it would, we could reckon with tearing a ticket and matching the two halves.
Yeah, well, it's so powerful, and I think people that spend time downrange, or people that firefighters, police officers, first responders that come home would benefit from reading that. Not just reading it, but thinking about it, internalizing it, and then doing so in the context of the book and their lives. And this is a short one now because it's the one Leonidas is most known for. here. And you write, the Egyptian laughed, his smile flashing as brilliantly as ever. He strained against the reins of his spooked horse. Xerxes does not want your lives, sir, he said, only your arms. Leonidas laughed. Tell him to come and get them. That one resonates through the ages. And did you know how powerful it was when you wrote it, or was it just part of the story?
I thought it was pretty powerful. That's in Greek, as you know, the phrase molon labe, which means come and take them, where the Egyptian referred to as an emissary of the Persians, of Xerxes, coming up in a moment of negotiation before the battle and saying, just give us, the king demands that you hand over your arms. And Leonidas said, come and take them, which is, it doesn't get any better. And that was true. That's not me. That was a real history.
Yeah, incredible. Love that. And then not too many pages later, you end with this. And if people have heard it before, I wanted to get your take on what it means. And there's the last lines of the book. Tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. What does that mean? Did you know what it meant right away, or have you come to understand it in a different way from when you first wrote it? What does that mean?
That is the written by the poet Simonides, and that is the gravestone, or whatever, the memorial for the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae. And I think it's one of the great ever, if not the greatest gravestone ever, for a few reasons. One is that the Spartans were famous for being very brief. They valued a really pithy, short thing, not, the glorious sacrifice of the, and Simonides, in writing that, I'll repeat it again for anybody who's heard here. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. So what's interesting about that is it doesn't mention the battle. It doesn't mention the year. It doesn't mention the enemy. It doesn't mention that they were soldiers. But all of that is contained in that wonderful, short, super laconic, Laconia being the region of Greece that Sparta was the principal city of. And it's also so simple that the Spartans are being praised simply for living up to their creed, that here to the death, that here obedient to their laws, we lie. The laws being, when you're sent out to defend something, you defend it to the death, and they did it. And so I think it's one of the all-time great. God bless Simonides. However, the muse was with him on that one.
And you start the book with it here with the historical note, and then you finish the book with it as part of the narrative. So I knew it was important to you to start the book with it and finish the book with that same quote. Just incredible.
Hopefully when the reader reads the thing at the start, he doesn't quite get it.
Yeah, exactly.
By the end, hopefully he goes, oh, now I see what that was all about.
Exactly. I think that's genius. And because the first time I read that too, I remember reading that the first time and wondering about it and getting to the end and still wondering a bit about it. So I never got to ask you specifically about that. And it's just incredible.
Yeah, thanks for these great questions, Jack, and for reading this thing so closely.
Cool. Well, it's such an important work. Like I said, here's my original. I have this one, the one you signed for me back there in hardcover, and it should be a part of everyone's library. And now I kind of want to move on a little bit from this in the time we have left, because you mentioned Robert. How do you say Robert's last name? McKee?
Robert McKee, yeah.
His books, all of his books, are on my shelf in my office, right next to these books of yours, and I have yours separate. I have these right here, and then I have all your other books on a different shelf, because I have these books on creativity here, and then all that historical, all your other works, just on a different shelf close by. But I did want to talk to you about all of these works on creativity, specifically the War of Art. Where did you get the idea to start writing these books about, not just about creativity, really about life. And there's a lot of leadership lessons in here as well. I'm not sure whether you know that or not. There are. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but where did you get the idea to start writing these things down? Did people keep asking you so many questions that you said, you know what, I'm going to write a book and put these things, so I don't have to keep repeating?
Exactly. That's exactly it. People would, would come, my friends would say, I know I've got a book in me. Could you sit down and kind of talk to me? And I would stay up till 2 a.m, not talking about writing, but talking about self-sabotage and warning them about this negative force that I call resistance with a capital R, and tell them that's what you're going to run into on day one. And you're going to be really mentally tough. And of course, nobody ever listened to me. Only one friend actually wrote a book, and it was a good one. But everybody else crapped out. And so finally I just said, let me just write this on a short little book, and then I'll hand it to them and say, here, read this, and I don't have to tell it all over again.
It's it's better use of your time. Instead of staying up till 2 a.m, you can just toss them this book. But all of these right here, and to include the warrior ethos also. But each one of these, because people ask me, what book should I read on writing, and if I want to write a book. And the danger today is that you can research something forever and never take that next step and actually do it. Not just writing, it can be anything. Let's say 40 years ago, maybe you could go to the library and ask a librarian, or go to a bookstore and say, hey, what are some good books on writing, on the process, or an author who wrote an autobiography where he talks a lot about writing, or she talks a lot about writing, whatever it is. And that person would take their favorite and give it to you, maybe point you in the right direction. You could read that and then, okay, time to start. But now with the internet, you can research forever. So it pays, I think, to be very selective so you don't waste a lot of this time that you're never going to get back. So that time you're never going to get back is a very good investment of that, is to read all of these books, starting with the War of Art, but going through all of them. The Artist's Journey, Nobody Wants to Read Your Shit, The Authentic Swing, Do the Work, Turning Pro. And I've read all of these, and they weren't all out at the time I started my journey, but the ones that were, I read all of those, and then since I've read the other ones that have come out. But so beneficial. So to those out there that are listening to this, I recommend start with the War of Art, but read them all, and you can get through them. That's another great thing. They're not daunting. So they can do this. They can go to your website and listen to that the course that you have on there that can kickstart people. But amazing right here. So the War of Art. Can you just tell me a little bit about how you came up with the title, and obviously the Art of War, but what that title means to you?
It actually was my friend and partner Sean Coyne who came up with that title. And I had a kind of a really lame title, and he said, we got to do better than this. And he came up with that title, which I think is a great one, because it's right on target. And what the book is really about, Jack, as you well know, it's not really about the craft of writing. It's not about character development or any of that stuff. It's all about managing our emotions, particularly our self-destructive emotions, for the long haul, 1 year, 2 year odyssey, where it's you alone, in a room facing this thing day after day, and that is the war of art, the war inside our head against our own procrastination, the susceptibility to distraction, fear, self-doubt, all of the things that every artist of every kind, including entrepreneurs, deal with all the time. So that's the War of Art, the war inside our head. And I tip my hat to Sean Coyne, my partner, who came up with that.
Yeah, they're all great titles. And I was in there yesterday all day. I did a little over 4,700 words yesterday, and which is pretty good. Wow. It's not my biggest day.
That's a month for me, Jack.
But it's exactly what you said. It's you and the keyboard. And so yesterday, all day was me and the keyboard. Started at 7, stopped at just before midnight, I think.
Wow.
Took a couple of breaks in there to eat.
7 in the morning.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was
That's a month for me.
there's a lot going on these days, so I gotta drive when I can. And after we finish today, I'll go back to that keyboard and do the exact same thing. I won't get 4,700 in today because that's a big day. I think it was about
For those who don't understand this, what Jack just said is like saying, well, I just climbed Annapurna, came down to the bottom, and then climbed K2. No problem. I mean, seriously, I'd be in the hospital if I ever tried to do that. You know, they'd have to medevac me in a helicopter.
My hand is definitely actually feeling it. Last book, I did one that was close to 6,000 in a day.
Wow.
But when I get close to the end on a project, when I'm not setting things up, when I'm not writing, what was it like in this city at this time frame, at this time of day, in the fall, whatever all those things are, when I'm not thinking those things through and it becomes dialogue and action, specifically dialogue, I can go a lot faster. And I'm able to do those longer days because I'm not trying to think, okay, I have this black and white photo from, let's say I'm describing someone's family history in order to inform their character today. And this thing happened in, let's say, 1887 or something like that. And I'm going back and I'm trying to think through how to describe this, whatever it is. Okay, that takes time. But if I already know these characters, I've already gotten, they're already essentially either friends or maybe foes, but regardless, I know them. Then, and they're in dialogue with one another, that's when I can do those kind of days that are long. It's not just, I can't sit down at the beginning and do a day like that because I don't yet know them. It's like sitting down with an old friend and having a beer and just talking for hours. It's like that at the end. At the beginning, you don't necessarily have that relationship with all of these characters, especially the new characters, especially the bad guys, because typically in my books they've all died in the last book. They've all been dispatched, and I have to have new ones in the current one. So as I get close to the end, I can have those longer days. But you write this, and I think about this a lot. Amateurs have amateur habits. Pros have pro habits. And I read Turning Pro either during my first book or right between first and second, somewhere in there. And you talk about the title, Turning Pro. And for me, that was so powerful because I thought, hey, this is, I don't like using the word simple, but if you think of yourself as a professional, it makes a difference. And I remember flying to Africa. I think I've told you this before, flying to Africa. I've just gotten out of the military. The first book is done. I'm editing it. I haven't sent it to New York yet. Haven't sent it to Simon & Schuster, but I'm already writing the next one. I'm already in True Believer because I know that I'm going to write two. If both don't work out, then I'm going to reevaluate my life choices. But I'm always going to do two because of the John Grisham story in that he wrote A Time to Kill first, couldn't give that thing away, then writes The Firm. Boom, takes off, international bestseller, Tom Cruise in the movie, and we've had a John Grisham book or two every year since. But if he had stopped after A Time to Kill and got discouraged because he couldn't give that book away, no one bought it, and I think it's one of his best, by the way. I haven't read some of the newer ones, but of those ones that I read all through the 90s and early 2000s, I thought it was his best work. But it didn't hit for whatever reason. Writes The Firm, boom. So I'm already going to write True Believer. I'm already going to Africa to do the research, to get the smells and the sights and the rocks and the dirt and the feel, because I knew that was going to be important to not just do a carbon copy of the first book and drop it in a different location, but to continue the journey of my character, continue his evolution with that theme of, now two words, violent redemption. The theme of the second book. But that was a very long way of saying that when they ask you your profession going in on those customs form, that's what I wrote. I wrote down author. I wrote down writer, I think. I wrote that down. I took a picture of it. It was before everything was going to the cloud, so it's somewhere on an old computer that I've kept. But that was important, and I got that from you, so I want to say thank you for that. And then I want to ask you, and I want to ask you, at what point did that come to you? Did you conceptualize it? And were you acting as a professional before you conceptualized it as, hey, there's a difference between amateurs and professionals?
Well, first I want to say you, Jack, to me are the consummate professional. And I patterned myself after you. Just when I'm sort of struggling in a way, I think, how would Jack do this? Would he be yielding to these thoughts that are going through my head. No, he wouldn't. God damn it. He bangs it out and all the things that you do. You are the consummate professional to me. So, but I think at some point, I can't even remember when, but it became very clear to me that I was working as an amateur, and that when things got tough, I would fold, and I would take failure and success personally. And at some point, I just realized I got to have a professional attitude like Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant. That's, they're pros, and that if I could just flip that switch, that maybe that would help me out. So, yeah.
Well, it certainly helped me.
My answer to how do you overcome resistance, self-sabotage, is turn pro in your head.
Yep, no, exactly. And I got from The War of Art, from Turning Pro, from these other books, from interviews that you've done. And I love this because, and I probably shouldn't even say it because I worry if I say it, then things will start to change. But, and this is generally how you frame it. And you talk about writer's block. And you say that you don't hear, you might not say this exactly, but this is how I frame it. You don't hear of a dentist having dentist block. You don't hear of a truck driver having truck driver's block. You sit down, you're a professional, you sit down and you write. And that has been so helpful to me because everyone talks about writer's block. You hear it. If most people have heard the term, even if they're not in this business, in this industry, people have heard it in a film, on a TV show, growing up, whatever it is. They've heard of writer's block and believe it's a thing because if you're told something for so long and it's normalized, why would you question this thing called writer's block? But I don't know where that came from, but I know that as a professional, you sit down and write because as a dentist, you sit down and do the job. As a truck driver, you sit in that seat and you drive. And if you're a professional writer, you sit down and you write. And so I say that in that I don't get writer's block because I sit down and I write and I'm a professional. But I got that from you again. So thank you for that.
And when I think of that sort of thing, I think, what would Jack do? No freaking way he's going to be blocked. If he has to grind it out for a month with nothing good coming, he's going to do that until on that 32nd day, the well starts to flow.
Got to do the work. Got to put in the work. Because I know that when people ask me about these sorts of things, I can't guarantee that if you put in the work and you put in the energy and the effort, I can't guarantee that you'll achieve whatever goal you've set for yourself. But I can do the opposite. If you don't do that, if you don't put in the time, energy, and effort, then you certainly will not reach that goal. And that's almost the best that I can give right there. So what are you going to do? And then that's up to the individual. In our last few minutes here, I want to ask you two last questions. How has Hollywood changed? And I know you switched from being a screenwriter to an author, but you've lived in Southern California. You've been in and around these things. You've had books turned into films. You've had other books optioned that didn't turn into films. So you've been in and around this industry for a while. How has Hollywood changed from your screenwriting days to your early days, let's say between 1995 and 2005, and then what you see today? How's Hollywood changed? And I won't say evolved because I'm not sure. I mean, it's evolved in a direction, but how has it changed? Is a better way to put it.
Devolved.
Maybe. I don't know. That's my question.
I confess that I haven't really been in the business for a while, so I'm not even sure what's going on. But I know it's become a real hell, I think, for writers, unless you're at the top tier. When I first came into Hollywood in the 80s, it was really a kind of a golden age of the spec script, meaning you could be, a car hop and go home and write something, with a little stubby pencil and sell it for $300,000 if it was good enough, because in that era, studios and producers were looking for a hit, and a hit went out there and made money. And so if you, the screenwriter, could deliver, Die Hard or something like that, you could really jump to the front of the line. Then that became corporatized and it became sequels and the studios became risk averse and da 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 da. So I don't know what's going on now, but also when my career, it wasn't like I ever decided I was going to leave. It was like they were through with me. It was like, you're over the hill, get out of here, don't ever come back. I could be in a meeting, and it was with three studio executives, and they would be 23 years old, 26 years old, 27 years old, and I'm 55 years old. So it was like, forget it. The minute you walked in the door, you were dead. So I just was sort of exiled and had no choice in the matter. I still think screenwriting is fun, but they always fire you, they replace you. And when the movie comes out, you look at it, you don't even recognize it. So I'm glad to be in the book world.
And same question, but for the book world, publishing. From your first book, Legend of Bagger Vance, through Gates of Fire and everything that you have done since, how have you seen publishing change?
I really should ask you this, because I've sort of I follow the muse. Whatever my next book is going to be, it might be a detective story. It might be something else. And I don't know. Sometimes I think the business has moved on beyond me. All I can do is what I love to do, and I've also I've had great agents, and my great agent Sterling Lord just died a couple of years ago. And so he made two deals for me when he was 100 years old.
Amazing.
And he died at 102. But the other thing is, and you know this, Jack, that like it used to be, when I first started, when Gates of Fire came out, it was reviewed twice in the New York Times, once in the Sunday edition, once in the regular edition. And that alone launched it into at least respectable success.
Yes.
Then, by 4 years later, there were no such thing as book reviews anywhere. Maybe in the New York Times, but never would I ever get anything reviewed again. So it now became a world where you yourself had to go out and promote the book, and you had to be the face of the brand and all that sort of stuff. And then there was the internet, social media, and that kind of thing. So that's where it's really changed, as you know. Like now, like I just made a deal for a book, and I got an author questionnaire from the publisher. And of course, the main thing is, how many followers do you have on social media? Who do you know? Joe Rogan? Can you get on the Jack Carr pod? That kind of thing, right?
Interesting.
In other words, the publishers are sort of punted to you, the individual writer, all the work of getting the word out. So it's a whole new world, and
Wow.
For somebody like me that's an introvert and doesn't really like to do that shit, it's not so easy.
That is very interesting. I did not know that. I did not get a questionnaire like that, because the answer to everything would have been no, because I'm coming out of the military. I have no social media presence, personal or professional, starting at zero across the board. I've never sold a book. I'm not coming from sports or politics, where people we have name recognition, where you can, let's say, leave professional sports and write your book about your time there, or leave politics, write about your time there. There's nothing. There's no platform upon which to build. So that's very interesting, because I've heard similar things about Hollywood, but not from anyone I know there, just from things that I've seen online about casting. And I have not experienced this with the Terminal List shows or anything else I'm involved with, but I have seen it on social media, in that they ask similar type of questions, or think about those type of questions when casting. I don't know if that's true, because it comes from a social media source that just popped up in my feed, but I thought that was interesting, and not something that when it stood out to me, because it's not something that we do on the Terminal List. But that it is fascinating, and as I stepped into it, as you know, as we've talked about before, I just looked at it like the battlefield. I'm coming in, I don't have a background in marketing, I don't have a background in advertising, I don't have a background in any of those things. I have a background from the military, and a reader, both fiction and non. And both have informed who I am as a person, who I was as a leader. So reading has been the foundation of all else. And so I looked at publishing the same way I would look at the battlefield in Iraq and Afghanistan, meaning How do you capitalize any momentum that we may have? What are the gaps in the enemy's defenses? Those sorts of questions. How is the enemy going to adapt to me? And then how do I, in turn, adapt to the enemy? Or even better, do it before, counter that adaptation before they do those things. So that's how I looked at publishing. And it was very clear to me when I stepped into it that if I wanted to have those levels of objective success that I would have looked at in the 80s as a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old, wanting to be up there on that New York Times list, seeing #1 New York Times bestselling author on the covers of the books I was reading by guys like David Morrell, Nelson DeMille, A.J. Quinnell, J.C. Pollock, Mark Golden, Tom Clancy, all of those authors that I grew up with back in the 80s, then I was not gonna be able to, like them, write a book, hand it to New York, rely on the publicist, rely on the publisher to build the readership, and only focus on the product. I knew I had to focus on the product initially because that has to be the best that it can possibly be. So for people that ask me the question about what they need to do as an author, I say, don't worry about a website, don't worry about social media presence, don't do any of those things. First, the book. It has to be about the story, because that is how you honor the readership, people that are going to spend time with you, they're never going to get back. That's the way you honor them, by solely focusing on the story and never even considering as you're writing, is this going to offend anyone? Is this like those sorts of questions? No, it has to be about the story. And so but point being, like you, I would much rather have just written a book, handed it to New York, and gone on to the next book, like I thought those authors did in the 80s. Because you're not getting on a website, you're not getting on a social media thing to follow an author, you're not doing any of those things in the 80s. You're just reading the book. Maybe you're catching one of them in an interview, maybe on like a morning show on Sunday, maybe. And that's only at the very top tier. You're maybe reading a review in the New York Times, possibly, that your parents have left on the dining room table, maybe. That's it. That's your only connection to the author. Now, obviously, it's a little different. It's an opportunity, though. So just like downrange, you're looking on ways you can capitalize on momentum, gaps in the enemy's defenses, like I mentioned, and you just apply that to any industry, but in my case, publishing, and you can see, oh, there is an opportunity here. If you have that product, if it is the best it can possibly be, and then you can shift out there to figure out how to build an audience in 2018 or 2025, how to build a readership. Well, now there are tools that allow you to do that. So it's really interesting, because I would much rather, like I said, write the book just like you and go to the next one. That's what I thought I was getting. The part of the allure was being able to live in a cabin in the mountains and not do anything else except write. Like that's what I thought of as an author. That was part of the allure as a kid. That is my vision of an author. Today, maybe you can do that if you're an outlier. If you have a Harry Potter book, or if you have, those are the outliers. People jump to those when they think of authors and successful authors, but Twilight. We have a run of these books like that. Those are the outliers. If you're not an outlier, if you're not writing Twilight or 50 Shades of Grey or Harry Potter, then you're going to probably have to put in this work and figure out how to connect and build an audience. So that was a very long way of of me telling you how I looked at it. But it's an interesting time, that's for sure. Interesting time. But there's opportunity out there. That was my main point, is that there is opportunity out there, which is tough for most authors, because I think most authors are introverted. I'm very introverted. I had to teach myself how to be extroverted in the military, but I'm much more comfortable just being introverted and just writing. That's why that's why I'm an author.
Yeah, I remember the phrase that you used. We talked before. You said, the phrase was "enter the space." Mm-hmm. If I'm going to enter the space, meaning be in the publishing business, you said, I got to use all of my gifts and that I learned as an officer and in combat, and then you said you wanted to enter it, with all guns blazing.
Gotta go. Yep. Gotta commit. So, all right. In the last few minutes that we have here, I also wanted to talk quickly about Government Cheese right here. So you have this book out there, and then this is the one. Can people still get, even though most of these burned, Can people still get the daily Pressfield, or what's the status?
They can't. It all burned up with the fire, but we will have some again. The Daily Pressfield is like a 365-day sort of a devotional thing that if you were going to write a book or something, you could put it beside your laptop and go from day 1 to day 365 and get some encouragement, stuff like that. And Diana, my partner, put together this great gift box that you were holding up, Jack. Those all burned up, and we probably won't reconstitute them again. But we will be ordering some. You can still order this from Amazon. It's just not the super great edition that we did ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you guys did such a great job with this, so I highly recommend everybody add these to the library as well. Of course, Gates of Fire, of course, all the books on creativity, everything that you've done. It's been such an inspiration to me personally and professionally, and I sincerely appreciate it. Kids need heroes these days. I had them growing up from books and from films, from history, and you give a book like this to a kid in junior high, high school, college, about to join the military, whatever it might be, about to enter the workforce. But Gates of Fire, the gift of a book, there's something very special about the gift of a book, because you have to put a lot of thought into that book and why it's going to impact, or how it could possibly impact the person that you're gifting it to. So Gates of Fire is that book.
Thank you, Jack.
A large segment of the population, it would be very beneficial to them. So Gates of Fire, add it to the library. If you haven't read it, read it and gift it as well. And thank you for everything. It's so great to catch up, and thinking about you guys out there with the fires, and anything I can do to help, always here. And I hope we'll see you in person very soon.
All right. Great, Jack. Thank you so much. Love to the family. Diana sends her love, and hope we see you soon.
Sounds great. Take care.
This episode of the Danger Close podcast is brought to you by Cry Havoc. From New York Times #1 bestselling author Jack Carr. Cry Havoc, a Tom Rees thriller. Order now.
Watch a Cry Havoc teaser here, or watch another episode of the podcast here.